Hello, a very, very warm welcome to episode 48. In this episode, we will be looking at chapter 15 of the Bhagavad Gita, which is the Yoga of the Supreme Spirit. Yoga of the Supreme Spirit. In this series, I have been interviewing Sister Denise, who has been sharing with us her insight and her wisdom and experience into one of India's most ancient scriptures, the Shrimad Bhagwad Gita. And I have found this series to be extremely interesting because Sister Denise has a very refreshing way of sharing, of understanding, and of looking at things. And she is kind enough to share her wisdom with us and you at home, the viewer, as well. So thank you, Sister Denise, for joining us.
Thank you.
Chapter 15, the Yoga of the Supreme Spirit. I must say I found the title interesting because the word yoga and connecting with God on a level that is called yoga in this book has been mentioned from chapter 3 onwards, and yet we now have an entire chapter dedicated to yoga of the Supreme Spirit. What does this say to you, Sister Denise, about its importance?
I think the position of it, 15, the total number of chapters is 18, so it's really getting towards the end of the book. I feel that the Gita is just moving us more and more and more in an increasingly subtle state of awareness of who is God, what does he want. And here we have, okay, yoga means you, the self, connecting with the Supreme Spirit. That is yoga, you know. So that's what it says to me.
So Denise, what I found curious is the title of this chapter is Yoga of the Supreme Spirit, and in the first few shlokas we hear about a tree. A tree, and I hope I get the pronunciation right, the Ashvata tree.
Yes.
Ashvata tree. Could you explain the significance of the Ashvata tree?
Well, the Ashwata tree is said to be one of the family of the fig tree, and that immediately makes one think of the biblical fig tree. Obviously, it's being used in a symbolic manner. There is another tree that we hear about, the Kalpa tree, and it seems to me that the Kalpa tree, or the way that we hear about the Kalpa tree in Rajyoga of Brahma Kumaris, corresponds very much to this Ashwata tree. It's also said to be an upside down tree. This tree is the expansion, and then it is said for Shiva, which is one of the names of Incorporeal God, Shiva is the seed of that tree. And you also get the expression Brahaspati, Vrikshapati, so for God being the seed of this tree of humanity. The leaves of the tree are described as being moved by the will of God. And I think that if you think of the people of humanity as leaves on a tree, where the genealogical tree of humanity is in the form of a tree with families and descendants and all of this, going back to one original great-grandfather, and then the great-grandfather being pushed into being, you can say, by the incorporeal one. So this is an angle on it. We're looking at God as the seed here, and our yoga has to be with the seed. And all of the verses of the Gita are asking us ultimately to detach from our attachment to the body, to prepare ourselves for the return to Brahman, the world of light, and also that is the dwelling place of God as the seed, and then every human soul is also in the seed form when it is there in Brahman, and also refers to an oval form, which is also the form of the seed. So I feel that it's connected with the idea of the origins and the expression, or the seed and the expansion.
Sister Denise, I know that you touched on this a bit in your initial answer, but does this tree exist in reality? Yeah, the next question is, what is reality? Okay. We're not talking about a physical tree, are we?
Well, anyway, physical trees don't grow upside down, as far as I can tell.
Well, there you go. So that covers that. So this, okay. So does this tree exist?
It's absolutely symbolic. I think when you say tree, you're really talking about the genealogical tree of humanity, which is a tree, but not that kind of tree. The shlokas go on to say that we have to cut this tree. And so in that sense, in the third shloka, we are talking about how our life spreads, here and there, and we get caught up in different things, rather like how a tree will grow. The message of this chapter is we need to cut the attachment.
Sister Denise, I'm still on Shloka 1, and I do appreciate what you said about Shloka 3, but I want to bring you back a couple of pages. Having its roots above where exactly?
There is a concept of the three worlds. In the Rajyoga that we study with the Brahma Kumaris, we have the incorporeal world, which is the highest world, and then you have the subtle region, the middle world, and then you have the material world, being the world below. So the tree's roots and seed is in the incorporeal world, so that's above in that sense. You'll also see later in the Gita it says above is where there is no sunshine, no moon. It's a different dimension altogether from the material world. But the expression of the souls, the expression of the creation is in the material world. You see, God is the creator who dwells in the world of light, in the world of Brahman. And then as we come down here onto the material earth, the seed is planted in the earth of the body. And there you see the expression of what is contained in the seed, the sanskaras, the role, everything is shown in the material world.
As you speak, the Christmas tree comes to mind, because that has been with us. We got that from our Christian brothers and sisters, but it's become universal, hasn't it?
Well, I think even the Christian adoption of the Christmas tree has an origin which is pre-Christian. And in fact, I remember discussing it with someone who told me that that tree was also considered to be an inverted tree, an upside-down tree. And then what you also find in Judaism, in the Kabbalah, they speak about a tree, which is, I think, all connected. So I think the tree has a lot of symbolic value as to how things start in a seed and they branch out, and also how all the spirits, all the human spirits, are connected with each other as the twigs, branches and leaves of a tree, and they're also all connected with the seed.
I want to take you through shloka number 3, which reads, "Its form is not perceptible here in the world, nor its end, nor its beginning, nor its existence. Cutting this Ashvata tree with its well-grown root by the strong axe of non-attachment." That is very powerful imagery, isn't it? And Sister Denise, the tree is obviously an old one. It's not a new one. It's implied within the 3 shlokas that it's grown.
Yes.
Okay, but what do you understand by what is contained in shloka 3, particularly the cutting it? Is that a human task to cut, or is it God's task to cut the tree?
Well, I think there's a number of levels on which you can look at this verse. First of all, the idea that it's invisible is important. And the other aspect that comes in the second line is that it doesn't have an end, it doesn't have a beginning. The existence of this tree cannot be seen or perceived by a human being through the sense perception. So this definitely is an image or a symbol that is given to humanity by God to help humanity to understand how we have become caught by the various different attachments. Non-attachment is a very, very subtle concept. And I think throughout the entire Gita, God comes back to it again and again and again. So the idea is that our understanding of non-attachment should be developing as we go through the study. You see the roots of a tree, if you think maybe like of ivy which really ties people up. And I think this is all to do with the karma that binds people to each other in karmic accounts. When we reach the end of the tree, this clearly says a well-grown root. That means we're towards the end of the tree. We're fully bound in so many different situations, karmic accounts. We've passed through many, many births, and now we've got to let go of everything. But we can't let go of it because it has a hold onto us. So just letting go isn't enough. We have to actually take an axe and cut it. Again, which is a symbol of a weapon. An axe is a weapon. We have to be very proactive and cut the ties that bind us. But at the same time, we have to be non-violent. There is a lot of letting go involved in the practical practice. Many people find themselves to be trapped in relationships or in debts or in something or another which is giving them different degrees of difficulty and even suffering. And so the question of endurance comes up here as well.
I want to take you now to shloka number 4, which reads, "Then that goal is to be sought from which having gone, no one returns. In what primal spirit, capital S, I take refuge, whence the primeval energy streamed forth."
So this one is really talking about the soul's return to God. Primeval is the initial. So God streams forth his energy. Or you can say that God is the initiator of everything that happens in the creation. And when the creation is at its beginning, it's got the full energy of God streaming. So we start from there, and then because it's a well-grown root, we have passed through the whole cycle of all of our reincarnations, and now we have to return to the beginning. And I think this expression, to take refuge in God, is a very important indicator about the yoga that we have to practice, because taking refuge in God means that we have to hold the mind really closely to the being of God in thought, which is really yoga, while all sorts of things are going on, difficulties which are perceived as very harmful to us, where we may have to endure a lot of things, but holding on to God enables you to make it through. I feel that this is really a description of that work that one does at the end of the cycle to release oneself through the assistance of God from all of these ties and bondages.
What interested me about shloka 5 is the last line, which reads, without arrogance or delusion, with the evils of attachment conquered, dwelling constantly in the Supreme Self, capital S, with the desires turned away, released from the dualities known as pleasure and pain, the undeluded go to that imperishable goal. And the goal is mentioned in the first part of verse 5, as well as the preceding verse. How do you understand that line?
Yes, it's a very beautiful description of what we need to be doing in yoga. You've cut your attachments. You have to be careful that they don't come back, because, you know, it's easy to let go in one fell swoop, but then you see you have to not take it back. And there is an energy that wants you to take back what you've left behind. Dwelling constantly with the Supreme means you have to keep the focus of attention in the Supreme Being, in God, the Incorporeal One, cutting away the attachments, but the desires which actually created the attachments in the first place. So we have to be free from attachment, free from the desires, those energies, and this pleasure-pain duality. So we have to go into our detachment, neutrality, letting go on so many different levels, because now I am returning to God. In a way, it's also preparation for death, you see. And so the imperishable goal means that dwelling in that world of light, which is the permanent nirvana, the Brahman, the Paramdam, that sixth element of light, if you will, where the soul is no longer active. It's again returned to the seed form and becomes totally still and merged.
I see that verse 6 takes up what you mentioned earlier about the existence of other worlds and the world we live in. The sun does not illumine, nor the moon, nor fire, that place to which, having gone, no one returns. That is my supreme abode. So the goal that's being referred to is to go to this place, which I assume is nirvana?
Yes, it is called nirvana, paramdam, brahmand, the world of light, brahmalok. There are many, many words for this, and this is where you return to, having completed your time on this earth in a cycle of reincarnations. I think it's a very beautiful description of the three worlds. So the world of light is like self-luminous space. And this is a question that many people have: where is God? And here he says, this is my supreme abode. I live there in the world of light. And he obviously takes an incarnation to speak to Arjuna, and he does that because he comes down to earth, down to our level, to tell us how to go back there, because otherwise there's no way that a soul can return without all of these detailed information and instructions. And I think I would interpret no one returns means no one returns back to the world as is presently constituted. But I do feel if we're here, we have a karma with the earth. So some of the time of our existence is here, and some of the time is there in the soul world. And it is the goal of Hindus that being born on earth is not what you want. It's hell, it's unpleasant, it's unfortunate. What you want is to leave the world and go to nirvana and remain there.
Could you please explain what is meant in verse 7, which reads, merely a fragment of myself, capital M, becoming an eternal, in brackets individual, soul, in the world of the living, draws to itself the senses, of which the sixth is the mind that exists in material nature. I find it difficult to understand that verse.
There is a belief that God is everything, and the individuation of all the different people is because God splits himself into many, many fragments, and each one of us is a part of God, and we play out the interactions that we have. It is connected with the idea that everything is God. However, there's another idea, which is what I would subscribe to, the idea that there is God who is individual, non-human, beyond the range of most humans, but can be accessible if he chooses to let us. If you're an eternal soul, you can't have a beginning, and you can't have an end.
So because you're a circle.
You're a circle. Eternal means you didn't start anywhere. So if God would fragment himself, that would be a beginning. The idea of God being permanent, eternal, us being permanent, eternal souls, although we pass through many incarnations and so on. And now it talks about the mind as the sixth sense. And I think that that is quite an interesting description of the mind, because the mind is like a sense organ which can perceive non-material realities as well as material realities via the sense organs. If you say, well, I'm me forever, God's good forever, and matter is matter forever, then you would be looking at a differentiated world. So that's how I would view that.
I found what is contained in verse 8 very interesting. When the Lord acquires a body. Now, acquires implies not born.
You know, Shiva is called Swayambhu. You've heard in previous chapters, I am birthless. He will take an avatar, take a body, but not be bound in birth and rebirth. So this is a very interesting expression, acquire a body. Like you acquire a possession, you use it for a while, you leave it.
And the next line, and also when he departs from it, not dies, not is cremated, when he departs from it, he goes, taking them along, them, I'd like you to explain who them is, like the wind blowing perfumes from their source. That's very poetic, but it gives interesting insight into what God's role is in humanity, linking it to the first part of this chapter, which is the seed of the tree. We're still in the same vein, aren't we? There's so much contained in this verse about God's vocation. And Sister Denise, again, I'm taken to what is contained within Christianity. I think it has been said, God comes like a thief in the night.
Yes.
Yeah, that popped to mind when I read this. But what is your understanding of verse 8?
You know, in Brahma Kumaris Rajyoga, Incorporeal God Shiva uses the body of the fortunate chariot that's called Bhagirat. The body of Prajapita Brahma holds both the soul of Brahma, and then the incorporeal Shiva can come, talk, leave, is not bound by the body. So he goes taking them along like the wind blowing perfumes from their source. I think this may refer to his mind, his sanskaras, his capacity to have intelligence stays with the soul. So he carries his self and his subtle organs with him like perfume on the wind. Very beautiful expression. And this also connects with the scene of the Gita where you have Arjuna and Krishna in a chariot. So the chariot we see as the symbol of the body, and you have the soul of Arjuna, who is the owner of that body, and then Krishna comes in as the driver. So he is just sitting there. He's not fighting any of Arjuna's battles or anything. He just simply comes to tell the knowledge, and then he goes. You see, we need to really think about what is being said to us and what we're being asked to do, which is to detach from everything and prepare ourselves to return to the world of nirvana, and also create the pure karma which will carry us into a subsequent kalpa or cycle.
That is a beautiful note on which we ended today's episode. As Sister Denise has shared, that as far as I think it is verse 8 is concerned, the role of God, how he comes, how he interacts with humanity and Arjuna specifically, and his vocation, and that is beautifully encapsulated in verse number 8. On this note, we'll have to say goodbye to you, but there will be more to come as far as this chapter is concerned. I do hope you have understood what Sister Denise was sharing. It's very beautiful to see the analogies, the metaphors, and the allegorical context in which the Bhagavad Gita is written, and to understand its depths. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, Sister Denise. And we do hope to see you again soon. Take care. Goodbye.